Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are watching this from. Welcome to the SE Ranking Charity webinar, where we have a action-packed 2 hours for you with 3 other very special guests. Very briefly about me, I am Barry Adams. I'm based in Northern Ireland, but the accent's from the Netherlands. I do SEO, specifically tech SEO and SEO audits for primarily news publishers, and I will be your host for today. We have a few really exciting guests lined up for you to do this webinar, and it'll be in the form of Q&A sessions where I'll be asking questions and hopefully get really good, exciting answers from Aleyda and from Barry and from Kristina. And I want to encourage you to ask questions as well in the chat wherever you're watching it, so I can ask them as well to the guests, and you get hopefully a good answer to whatever SEO problem that you're having from these specialists. So the running order is first me, Aleyda, then I'll be doing half-hour slot, and then we have Kristina, and then we end with Barry Schwartz at the end. I want to tell you a little bit about SE Ranking as a platform. One of the people that are hosting this, they have a very big presence in Ukraine, which is why this is a cause that's close to their heart. It's an all-in-one SEO platform. It has a rank tracker, that has a backlinks checker, has a site auditing tool, competitive analysis tool, and it's quite advanced and definitely worth a try if you haven't yet given it a shot. At the end of the webinar, we'll show you a link to get an extended free trial, so you can try it yourself. But the main purpose, of course, of the webinar is for us to get donations for Save the Children, specifically for the Ukraine project, where they help children with clothing, with medicine, with financial support, relocation support as well. And the reason why this is, of course, so dear to the people at SE Ranking is because they've been directly affected by it. A lot of the team are still based out of Ukraine, and they have lost a dear colleague and her children as well last month, which was, of course, a terrible, terrible event. So yeah, if you can donate, it is a free webinar, but we definitely want to encourage you to donate if you can to help them reach the $10,000 goal, because that money will all go to the Save the Children Ukraine Fund, and will be very well spent to help the children that are affected by this terrible war, and hopefully be able to bring some light to their lives at the moment. So we're starting with Aleyda Solis. I don't know if anybody in SEO does not know who Aleyda is, but she's, I think, the unofficial queen of SEO, also a good friend of mine, and we regularly talk about SEO topics. We see each other at conferences and the socials around it. Aleyda, why don't you give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Barry, for having me at the SE Ranking team for organizing today's webinar. Very looking forward to share today. I'm an SEO consultant. I have my own SEO consultancy called Orienti. Usually I tend to focus on SEO processes that are focused on technical, international, strategical SEO processes. I usually work also with whether established brands supporting or already established also in-house SEO teams, or also startups that are looking to achieve a high growth through organic search too. And I'm very looking forward to share with you today. Hopefully we will be covering quite a few insights, focus on the content side of things. That I have to say, right, I do feel that even if a lot of my focus with clients tend to be through the years on the technical configurations, more and more, I believe that the maturity has developed, and the level of sophistication and readiness of even early startups, that more and more my focus has been on the content, which is that next layer, right? So I'm very, very happy to see this too.
Brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, if anybody wants to ask a question to Aleyda in the chat, please make use of the opportunity. We see the comments pop up on our screen, and I'll pick some good questions to ask. I have some own questions to start off with, and I want to know what you see as the most common issues when it comes to optimizing content and the most common mistakes that people make when it comes to optimizing content for search.
Yes, potentially for depending on the type of website, right? So I see a lot already well-established, very big websites. They tend to have tons of cannibalization issues, right? Especially those that have been already there for a while with hundreds of thousands or even millions of pages, all indexable. And then they realize that yes, they're ranking already well for many of their top queries, but not with the right page that will better connect with that user intent at that point of the user journey. So of course, like they are not converting as much as they could, or they are not ranking also as much as they could. As well as they could. So there's that with very established players. Then on the other hand, with e-commerce websites, what I have found a lot is that because of their commercial focus and an angle, they overlooked a lot the informational queries and the top of the funnel opportunities. Because of, yes, they want to focus, and I understand, right? They want to prioritize transactional type of queries that will provide a little bit of more direct value. But what we cannot forget is that even if you tend to rank well for certain type of queries, to establish authority, to establish trust also, and forget about the search engine for a moment, from your potential customers and users that sometimes will leave some non-trivial money on you. Even if you end up ranking in second position or even first position, if there's another player ranking even below you, right below you, that the user already know that they have been consuming information from about that particular topic that they want to buy, they are not going to buy, let's say, a bike from you that costs thousands of euros or dollars if all what they have been reading about guides and criteria to buy bike have been from the player right below you. They will click on the other player rather because they have already established a trust. So we need to think about how to connect and align better the content in this type of cases. And so for e-commerce website, I feel that there's still a lot of opportunity there that I tend to find again and again. Then finally, I will say I am working more and more with SaaS businesses lately too. And I find in there like tons of opportunity in the, let's say, branded queries. And I know, again, that these are not the typical type of queries or keywords that like a brand, a business, a website will tend to prioritize in their SEO process. But again, to well connect it through the user search journey with potential high value queries, especially in the SaaS business, is very, very common because these are subscriptions, to research a lot and to compare a lot of the different players within the market, right? So when you compare two project management systems or software, you compare two money the delivery apps or transaction apps, right? Like you will tend to mention them both. And sometimes, unfortunately, in this case, the challenge is that some brands, they don't want to mention their competitor. Or they are afraid to target these queries because, of course, they need to ensure that the comparison doesn't leave them looking bad in certain features that they still don't have. So there is a very gray line, let's say, to be balanced, to be honest, to be transparent, but also to serve the user with a good information that will support the decision-making journey too. And that is also a very, very good opportunity. It's a matter of being honest and having a good balance of how you approach those queries in a way that is consistent also with your own brand. And then potentially, finally, the last issue that I can think of that is also very common for e-commerce websites too, are the category pages type of approach that many websites have, right? Like a lot of players, I think, out there, when they hear that Google tells you, oh, you need to have enough content and many category pages, They are just an aggregation of links. And so it's difficult for us to sort out to what you should be ranking for in the first place, or to compete with other players that have more content, right? And this is tricky, right? Because what many e-commerce websites end up doing is just to add a how-to guide at the bottom, and they actually hide the text because they don't want to damage the conversion, right? There's a lot of concern there in terms of conversion, and here is a matter of blending the content that actually makes sense to show to the user at that stage of the journey, an FAQ about criteria to decide the best characteristic of why those type of products are the best for you at that point, or why they are not, right? And suggest other options. So this type of content that should be very well blended within the design. And here is why content writers, SEOs, and designers, we all should work together to avoid leaving the text at the bottom in the footer, right? Just to not be seen by the user, but actually highlight the text in a way that makes sense along with the products to support the product decision making process, buying process from the user, right? So a lot of things here, but I love how if we see many of this, let's say, content issues comes not only purely from a purely content optimization standpoint from SEO, but also the overlay of SEO and design, SEO and the customer journey, and why it is so critical for SEOs to coordinate well with other areas to make it happen in a way that it makes sense for the business.
Yeah, I really love that example with category pages. It's an issue I come across a lot as well. What do you put on a category page that's not just a list of links to other pages? So what would your key steps be to actually optimize content for search in all these different contexts?
So, for example, what I really like now is that many tools provide hints about what is the intent of the queries that we're researching, but that is good, and that can let's say save you a little bit of work. But I highly recommend to, especially to identify low-hanging fruit opportunities, is to already see which are those queries that are highly relevant, important for you, and you're already ranking more or less well in the top 10. But the click rate is very poor. It's below the average that you tend to have for this type of pages. To go and take a look at and see if the page that is ranking for these queries is actually the right one, the correct one, and if not, to then say, okay, maybe it's because I have all of these category pages that I have been focusing on a lot, and I don't have content that targets that the initial stage of the journey, top of the funnel stage, yet with guides or with pillar pages to establish authority about this topic, and then you go ahead and create these pages for them, and establish also a good internal linking strategy to support each other, which is also something that sometimes is also very well missed, I'm afraid. Then on the other hand, regarding those pages that you identify that these are the correct ones, the ones that are the right ones to rank for the query, it's not a matter of a mismatch in intent, but it's a matter rather than, well, make the pages more competitive. And here's the typical question that comes, right? But how much content should I feature? How much content? And here's like, is the content that should fulfill your user search need, and also that is more comprehensive than those players that are already ranking in the top position. So I highly recommend to go and take a look at which are the players ranking in the top position. For many queries, you will see, and this is the funny thing, right? Is for many queries, there's not necessarily a very clear, whether very commercial or very informational intent, and there's a blend of players ranking. So even sometimes, like for many products related queries, we can see many guides, top best product guides, ranking top positions, then a little bit of blend of category pages, then another blend of actual product pages. So you see blends of pages. So to identify with the type of page that you do want to incentivize to rank better, to see like how much information, what questions are addressed, how they are displayed by competitors. It's not a matter only on search volume or number of words, but which are the topics that are actually addressed in those pages, and then think about how you can make it even better, how you can even fulfill it in a much better way with your own content, and then take the appropriate steps on doing that. I'm afraid that it requires a little bit of more manual validation, analysis. This is the type of thing that cannot be completely automated, for sure. Maybe to identify the opportunities a little bit, but to ensure that it's correctly optimized is something that you need to prioritize, of course.
Yeah. Is intent something you can find out automatically, or is it literally just a matter of typing it in Google and seeing what type of pages show up?
Well, this is the thing, right? Like a lot of tools out there, what they try to identify a little bit is like the search features that are included also. And then realistically, I do believe that the certain type of queries where this is very straightforward, right? Like if you're an e-commerce website, it's product names. You are a sneakers website. When someone are searching for specific sneakers brands and models very specifically, you know that these are going to be targeted by product pages. When it is about generic sneaker types or colors, etc., this you tend to develop this know-how, right, to identify patterns to easily let's say classify pages. But realistically, I am seeing more and more queries that have a much blended type of mix in the SERPs, right? It's not everything transactional or everything informational, right? For example, for a long time, I had a food delivery or delivery app as a client, and every core update from Google, you will see the switch that of the blend that we will make for example, food delivery in this city, in city name, right? And you will see that sometimes it was the top 3 results were the guides from the major publication or newspapers or food websites discussing the top places to order food in that city. Then the relevant city page of the top websites of those delivery apps. Then overall publications talking about the best rated restaurants that also offer food delivery. So you see this blend, and this blend is changing all the time. So again,
Is
it's
that a case
important
that
to double check.
is it a case that Google sometimes doesn't really know what people want? I mean, they're getting much better at this with a new natural language algorithms, that one after the other with BERT and MOM and all of those. But I think they're not quite there yet, are they?
Indeed. I mean, you see how they continue to shift results and refine results, how they integrate more also features in this type of results to the product ones, for example. Those are fun and definitely a challenge sometimes to understand how to target them. That is why I always mention to clients that are at a certain level already, that have already their whole main web structure optimized, is that for whatever that is your core topic or product, that you already have your transactional pages, especially e-commerce, right? Like, please allocate a little bit of budget to develop content that might not necessarily be highly tied to commercial intent, but you know that because of this blend that Google is showing, won't only allow you to establish trust and topical authority for this, but also will end up having chances at one point to be even included or featured for many of these SERPs that are already identified to be generic enough or ambiguous enough for Google, that sometimes they are blending these results. Yeah,
it's the supporting content, so you're not purely a sales machine on your website. Yeah. And last question we had prepared: how do you address common search engine optimization challenges, like common issues that especially small businesses or people new to SEO would be struggling with?
Yes, I believe that, thankfully, right, like there are more and more tools, plugins, extensions that can highly facilitate configuration and will eliminate, let's say, the most common issues. And here, the most important thing will be to know how to configure them, to not think that is only about checking some clicks and all my content will be now, because it has a green line, in a green light in a certain tool or plugin is already optimized, right? I will say that it's very, very important to have the basics, the fundamentals set, to do a very good keyword research. Many businesses, I'm afraid that especially the ones that are starting, still follow a checklist and they think that's it, but they need to follow let's say a more strategical approach into SEO, like what brings at the end of the day the revenue, which are the products that you want to sell or the services that you want to sell, and what content you need to create in order to support the buyer journey to drive those sales, right? So think above SEO, right? And SEO, what needs to do is to support the proper configuration and optimization of those pages in order to be surfaced in the search, right? But realistically, it's about thinking from a strategical standpoint, because all that will allow you to prioritize. When you are small, the issue is that you have a lot of flexibility, because yes, it's very small number of pages. You potentially have some hours of a developer and plugins, but at least you're working with a WordPress or a Shopify or a system that allows you certain flexibility, and you don't have the burden of millions of URLs and bureaucracy to ask for permission for even a redirect in a huge company, right? That many huge big websites will tend to have. So take advantage of that. Be lean, be fast, know how to prioritize which pages that actually will drive the value that you care about. And there's never, and this is I think that there's this a little bit of a misconception still on websites that are starting to do SEO. You will never have like a completely perfectly optimized website. That doesn't happen. That
Doesn't
never
exist,
happens.
does it?
So you need to prioritize carefully, especially if you have you are short on resources on what actually matters.
I have a good question here from Joel. He wants to know, is it a good thing or a bad thing for SEO to link to categories?
It is critical. It's fundamental to have a good internal linking configuration and structure, understanding which are the categories that matter for you. This is easy when you have a small website that only have like 5 categories, and you're on e-commerce. You literally sell 5 type of products, and you can link them all from your main navigation and every footer, and so every page on your website links to them, and then they link to subcategories and the products, right? So it's very straightforward. The tricky thing comes when you have hundreds of them, when you scale. So here it is key to define which are the broader categories, the top 5, the top 10 that you will be linking every single time across all of the pages, and which are the subcategories that will be their children that needs to be linked from those category pages. But also cross-linking between categories that belong to different areas is also important. The other day I was reading an excellent article that it made me realize that this was still an approach, like creating silos. So for example, if you have a purses category that only the subcategories under the purses, the purses main categories will be cross-linking between them, like red purses, green purses, or purses of a brand, purses from another brand. No, you want to also cross-link from the purses subcategory to, let's say, the pants subcategory, because sometimes the user will also find useful to understand which are the purses that will match better certain type of pants, or that are bought together, or that belong to the same brand, or that will be trendy in the next season. And this gives not only a very, very good opportunity to improve the cross-linking between subcategories, but also to improve the buyer journey and support the buyer journey in a way that makes sense and match the way that the people search, right? So yes, good internal linking is critical. Not wasting this. I think this is not necessarily a huge problem for a smaller website, but for bigger ones, right? Not wasting your let's say internal link popularity or your cloud budget going into facet URLs that are not indexable anyway, or internal search result pages too. I see still that a lot. But linking well to those categories, subcategories, and products that are actually meaningful for you to attract rankings, traffic, and purchases at the end of the day.
That's very good. Leading into this, sort of a related question from Waylist10. Is it enough to use breadcrumbs for internal linking, or should we use more links inside the body?
More links for sure. So I love breadcrumbs. These are amazing to facilitate the crawlability and the navigation also from a user standpoint at in every level of the web structure, right? But beyond breadcrumbs, I always like to add that the recommended products or recommended categories or products or categories that are searched along with this one, right? So always find a way to cross-link to other areas, sister areas that are the same level than the ones that you are, but from other sections or the product lines, right? To improve the cross-linking between them. That is also important. And then, of course, if these are guides or informational content, when you can include links that go to other guides or content that are related semantically, also go ahead and definitely link to them. With only the breadcrumbs won't be enough, because the breadcrumbs will always go up and down. Only one allow you to go cross at the same level in the web structure.
Yeah, it's a vertical silo you're creating with breadcrumbs rather than a more cross-pollination approach. One more question before I go to the short blitz questions at the end. One more question from Dennis. When placing extra content on a category, is it better to place all the content above the products and view part of it with the read more, read less button? How would you format that?
This is the button where to place all the content above the products and view. But so this is interesting, right? And I will recommend you to test it. I won't say this or that. This is definitely the type of thing that, honestly, from an SEO standpoint, a lot of people say, oh, you need to add and feature enough meaningful content above the fold, right? What is above the fold nowadays, like, because depending on the mobile device that you use, and yes, you can try to replicate the user agent that Google use, whatever, but realistically, if you have meaningful content, you can show even a couple of lines and see more below the products or within the product. So this is a typical thing that I will recommend you to test, and you don't necessarily even have to do like a technically complex SEO A/B testing if you are not yet ready to do that. And now there are more even solutions, right? But just select a couple of categories that behave in a similar way, and in one of them, leave the content potentially a little bit below the fold, blend it within the products, leaving the first product row that is visible to the user below the heading. That is always important. That is very visible, and at the top, of course. And then the other one, you can picture it at the top and see how it impacts the conversion, because this is, at the end of the day, what you are actually want to achieve. See how this impacts realistically rankings or traffic. It might be trivial and might not compensate. You might even be surprised and find that when including the content above the fold, the conversion even improves. So you try to blend and see how it impacts it all, because I really dislike the fact that you tend to recommend like boilerplate approaches or and it ends up hurting conversions, which you should care a lot about, or UX or user experience at the end of the day. So I like to blend the testing here that you can do in different ways to verify that is good in every case. In any case, just potentially to complement this, a smart way to improve and expand the content that you show in product pages. I still see many product pages, in category pages, sorry. I still see many category pages that pretty much only list 6 products per page. And then they rely on paginations a lot to see more, right?
That.
Yeah. So, and this I can guarantee. Test this. Go ahead and test it. And instead of showing 6 pages, so 6 products per page in category pages, show 20 products per category page. It will be more relevant, the page, more content. And then I assure you, and you might again test it rather than take it as a rule of thumb, test it and see how this impact conversion, how this impact traffic. I can assure that in 99% of the cases, it will improve. The only caveat here, the only thing that maybe you want to take as a threshold is that you cannot continue to do that when you identify that it hurts UX and that it hurts also loading times. Because when you end up like featuring like, I don't know, 100 products per page, per category page, yes, the page might be too big at the end. So that is when the threshold come, and you want to continue testing until that happens. Otherwise, this is a great, easy, straightforward way to improve the relevance of the page, feature more content, and also in most of cases also improve the buyer the buyer journey and super better the buyer journey and improve conversions.
It's much easier to scroll than it is to click to the next page, isn't it?
100%.
Right. I'm going to wrap up our session with a few quick fire questions. And I know you don't really answer a question in 1 or 2 words, but
all right,
give it
your
best shot. Do quick results exist in SEO? Do quick results exist in SEO? Can you get quick results in SEO?
If your website is really bad, then yes. So for example, if you have your whole domain blocked or where the meta robot no index, then yes, it will be quick to fix it. So if you're really bad, if you're really, I won't say a bad word here, but if you're really bad, then quick results can happen. But then you really need to be bad, right?
Yes. What do we mean when we talk about short-term results in SEO? How short is it? Is it days? Is it weeks?
Again, it depends. But if you're the single new player in a market where there is no competitor, potentially it can be weeks. But no, realistically, in most cases, it will be months. Right? Yeah. We need to be realistic here, and short-term in SEO is indeed it's month.
What would be the best indicators to show that a quick result has been achieved? Is it all about traffic, all about rankings? What would be the key KPI?
Yes, I will say that this is interesting and important. The KPI that you set with the client or with the decision maker at the end of the day is what matters, right? Because maybe for us, is traffic has improved, the rankings have improved, but if they don't care about that and they care about sales, it doesn't matter, right? I'm afraid. So it's about a good alignment with the actual goals and the KPIs, and agree on KPIs that they care about and not necessarily you. Because sometimes I'm super happy about improved crawlability and indexability, and of course the CEO or the C-suite, they won't care about that. They care about the actual conversions and the revenue of those pages that, or the products that they do care about. And of course you can achieve that with a ranking well for a single query that is super popular, or ranking more or less well or the best for many keywords that are much more specific. So there are always different ways to achieve the final goal of the SEO process. And what is important is to ensure that we communicate, and what we work on and focus on is what matters for them from a business standpoint.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more question, or 2 more questions. Let's do 2 more quick ones. This is a fun one. What's the most important aspect of SEO? Is it content, links, technical, or behavioral?
Oh my God, is the one where you are behind your competitors.
I like that answer. I love that. And last one, how carefully should you follow Google's guidelines? Can you argue with it?
How often do you?
How carefully should you follow Google's guidelines?
Well, this is the thing. I believe that most of Google guidelines at the end of the day is to ensure that you don't trick them or manipulate them in order to rank something that doesn't deserve those positions and rankings. So at the end of the day, as long as, let's say, you don't do things that are aligned with those bad intents, it should be okay. It should be aligned. It's common sense, right? That we need to follow a bit. So sometimes I see SEOs and I see decision makers when working with them that have previous SEO experience that obsess a little bit about that. But hiding a little bit that text wouldn't be seen as cloaking. Will Google penalize us? And they are very obsessed about this. It's like, what is the intent of this? The intent of this is provide a better user experience, not to manipulate Google. The user will also end up finding about this anyway if they click on this. So again, is the final purpose of thinking about that, the final purpose of it, and the intent of why you do things at the end of the day.
Love that answer. Well, can I thank you very, very much, Aleyda, for donating your time so generously to this and for answering all these questions. I hope the attendees got a lot of value from it. If you're not following Aleyda yet on Twitter, what's wrong with you? Everybody needs to follow her. It's at Aleyda on Twitter. Big thank you, Aleyda. Really,
Thank
really
you very
appreciate
much
it.
for the opportunity, taking a little bit of a selfie before finishing. I really appreciate the opportunity. It has been wonderful to be able to share with you, and all the best for the rest of the webinar. Barry, you're amazing, and thank you to the SE ranking team for the chance to share with all of you. Take care. Bye bye.
Thank you. And attendees, if you're not yet donating, please do. The link is in the chat. Please use that to donate to the Ukrainian Children's Relief Fund from Save the Children. We really, really appreciate your donations. The seat's gone up quite nicely. Brilliant. We're already over $2,300. So please do that and share the link as well with your friends, your family, your co-workers, so that we can get as close as possible to that goal today. Thank you very much. Right. For the next 25, 30 minutes or so, you have just me. I've taken over as host as well as doing a session myself. So I'm going to be talking to the voices in my head. Please do ask questions in the chat if you can. I want to answer as many as possible. I have a few things I want to talk about first before we dig into the questions, but please use this opportunity to ask me anything. My specialty is technical SEO and SEO for publishers, but especially technical SEO I know is a bit of a hot topic that people are always concerned about. So if you have any question at all relating to tech SEO, please do ask it in the chat. So that I can fill the next half hour without having to spend too much time thinking about what to say. But the first thing I want to talk about is Core Web Vitals. It's performance in general, I suppose, and Core Web Vitals specifically, because it's a hot topic in SEO and has been since Google announced it as ranking factors, which they now are since about a year, I think. And I always get asked, how important are these? How big are they as ranking factors? And I have to say it depends, which is sort of the standard answer. And I suppose I have to put like a coin into the swear jar now for saying it depends, because it is a bit of a swear word in SEO. But it depends on how advanced your website is. If your website is very advanced and very mature when it comes to SEO, and you're ticking a lot of the boxes already, then the performance and the Core Web Vital scores actually become quite important. That is that little bit of an edge that you can have in your competitive landscape that can set you out from everybody else, that can give you that advantage in Google search rankings, and it can elevate you just above the norm. Whereas if you're quite new to SEO and you're quite beginning with SEO and you're still struggling with things like optimizing page content and title tags and finding a good site structure and thinking about internal linking, you probably don't want to worry too much about your Core Web Vital scores. It's a small ranking signal. Poor performing websites can still rank well in Google, but at some stage you're going to want to address that. It helps if you are on a third-party content management system, like a hosted version of WordPress, or a hosted content platform like Wix or Duda or Shopify, because they tend to put a lot of effort into making their websites faster as part of their complete website service. So it's not something you have to worry an awful lot about if you are with one of those hosted website providers. The people at the HTTP archive put out an annual web almanac where they talk about what's happened on the web in terms of technology and content and all of that. And they have a section on that on performance. And they can show you a graph where you can see how different web platforms, different web technologies perform in terms of speed and Core Web Vitals compared to one another. And it's a very interesting graph. It shows that WordPress as a whole isn't doing too well, but that's also because WordPress is, of course, such a vast ecosystem that hundreds of millions of websites run on it. And you will have very fast performing WordPress websites and very poor performing WordPress websites, depending on how it's designed or how it's hosted, what kind of plugins they have installed, etc., etc. Whereas the hosted platforms like Wix and Duda and Shopify have a bit more control over what is and isn't allowed on the platform. It's much more controlled ecosystem. So you, as a website owner, have less flexibility, but that comes with the advantage that it's usually faster, those platforms, because they're better optimized. Especially Wix and Duda are two platforms that I saw in those graphs that are really high performing, really fast load speeds, really good core by vital scores. And of course, you're sort of stuck in their ecosystem with the templates and the themes that they have. But for a lot of businesses, especially smaller businesses, those website platforms will have all you need, and you don't really need to go and have someone else design and build an entire custom website for you if you can just use one of those platforms. When it comes to e-commerce, I love Shopify for beginning websites anyway. It's a hosted platform, but you can very quickly start an e-commerce website. And it sort of takes care of a lot of the technical SEO boxes straight away. Things like structured data is implemented by default. Like I said, the core web vitals are there. The internal linking tends to be quite good. The website is very good for crawling and indexing in Google with XML sitemaps that are made available, etc., etc. So that makes it very easy for you to tick those boxes, and you can focus then on actually, making the content of your website as good as possible, and on the marketing that is needed to make that website more popular, to attract links, to attract more traffic to it. So you don't have to worry too much about the technical side. You probably don't have to worry at all about the technical side. You can just focus on maintaining that good website and creating great content for that. So I used to be a bit anti website platforms, and I still think there are some really poor ones out there, like Squarespace. I'm not a fan of them because they tend to not be very good for SEO. But that used to be the case for Wix as well, and they've made such a shift in the last few years, Wix especially, that now I can actually recommend it to small businesses. Yeah, maybe you should try Wix because it does a lot of good things. So I've had to change my opinions over time on these hosted website platforms. You don't have to have complete custom built websites, but you can use a hosted platform to take care of most of the heavy lifting for you, and that's also the case for performance. So yeah, when it comes to core web vitals, don't worry too much about it unless you are very advanced in your SEO. And in which case, like I said, then it becomes that small competitive edge that you might need to outrank your competitors. A similar question I regularly get asked is about crawl optimization, because a lot of people in the SEO industry write a lot about how to optimize for crawling and how Google has limited crawl budget for websites, so they don't try to crawl every single page on your site, but they'll sort of have a set amount of effort of daily crawl effort, weekly crawl effort on your website. Now, if your website is less than 100,000 URLs, you probably don't need to worry about crawl optimization. Google themselves say anything under 1 million URLs, probably not really. You don't have to worry too much about optimizing for crawling. I think between 100,000 and 1 million URLs, you probably need to look a little bit about optimizing for crawling. But yeah, over 1 million URLs, it actually becomes a bit more important, and you have to have a good view of how Google crawls your website, what sections it spends the most time on, and what its crawl effort is being spent on. The crawl stats report in Search Console, which you can find in Google Search Console, under the settings report, there's a button there to open the crawl stats report. It's a bit hidden. I don't like where it is at the moment, but the crawl stats report itself is an absolute gold mine when it comes to optimizing for crawling, because it tells you what Google is crawling, where they're spending their crawl effort, how many crawl requests they make, and especially if you have a Google Search Console account for your on a domain level, so not just for your website like www.website.com, but for the domain, so like website.com and all the subdomains combined as a domain level Search Console account, you can get some really interesting data that Google might be crawling some subdomains that you don't even know Google was spending crawl effort on, or you might not even know exist in the first place. So I really, really like using the crawl stats report to do some analysis there and find out if there's a lot of crawl waste on the website. But if, like I said, if it's under 100,000 pages, and most websites would be smaller websites under 100,000 pages, optimizing for crawling is not something you really have to worry an awful lot about. It's something that Google is quite good at themselves, at finding the right pages to crawl and prioritizing where it crawls, where it spends its crawl effort. So don't overanalyze that. There's a few questions that pop up in the chat, which I think are very useful to answer. So I'm going to start with A question from Arun, which was asked at 3:30, so it's a while back, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What is the effect of improving web performance on SEO? How quick can we see the effect? It's context dependent. Again, how quick can you see the effects of improving your performance? I think you probably see an effect more on the users on your website before you see an effect on the SEO of the website. Um, it's one of those interesting ones where if you improve performance, you're primarily actually making your website more pleasant to use for your users, for the people who visit your website, and then the SEO benefits tend to come later. Having said that, in some contexts, you can see quite quick results. I've had one client who improved their core web vital scores, and this is a publishing client, a news client, so quite a big website and quite a lot of traffic. And when they launched a new version of their front end that had a significant improvement in the core web vitals and performance, they saw an almost immediate uplift in traffic coming from Google. So this was very direct cause and effect relationship there. But that's more of an exception. You don't tend to see that very often. Usually it's, you create, you make small changes on your website all the time, over time. And it's very hard to isolate a specific thing that you did and correlate it with a specific effect in rankings and traffic. I'm a big fan of the James Clear model, the aggregation of marginal gains, which is basically doing things slightly better over time, has an add-on effect so that it becomes a steep line upwards. And the same goes for SEO. You do small things better, you improve your website a little bit every time with every better page, every piece of content you optimize, every improvement you make to the website in terms of performance and usability and conversion. It all has an add-on effect. The biggest mistake I think you can make is to not do anything on your website and just leave it as is and see it as a finished product, which is the same as walking backwards, because your competitors are probably not sitting still themselves. You're just building up a backlog towards your competitors, and SEO is pretty much a zero-sum game. When you lose, someone else wins, and vice versa. When you win, someone else loses. So you have to put that constant effort in to maintain that traffic. It doesn't have to be a lot of effort. You don't have to, especially for small businesses, have to put a lot of investment into SEO. But I would still recommend to do some constant maintenance and improvement activities so that you're always improving and you're not really getting behind on your competitors, because once you're behind, it can be quite hard to make up that gap. It can be quite hard to shift into that extra gear and find those advantages that you lost along the way. Some other really good questions. This one is from Miriam. Miriam asks how to recover from switching a store to a different e-com platform, and as part of that, due to other factors, having to switch the store to a subdomain and use a CNAME to redirect from the old URL. So basically, complete technology stack change and domain name change. That's a tough one. That's a tough one because you lose a lot of ranking value in the process. Even with one-to-one redirects, even if your URLs don't change too much. And I imagine when you change technology stack, you change URLs as well. You lose ranking value along the way there. And if Google will basically have to come to terms with your website, not entirely from scratch, but it's not far off. There's a build-up period for Google to, understand your new website, understand your new pages, your new URLs, and assigning trust to that and be trusting your website with that. It's those site migrations are always tough. They're always difficult, and it's very rare to be able to do those with no traffic losses at all. If you're anywhere less than 10% traffic loss when you do a site migration, especially if it's a domain name migration, you're doing really, really well. Losing a quarter of your traffic is perfectly normal in those sorts of circumstances. And the best that you can do is to just focus on classic marketing activities to build up those trust signals. Do really good content marketing on your website. Do some paid ad campaigns as well, perhaps to boost it a little bit. In terms of SEO, digital PR campaigns to build links to your new domain, to help build the brand mentions of your website as well. Those sorts of things. In terms of technical SEO, it's one-to-one redirects as much as possible for every single old product URL, redirecting one-to-one to the new product URL. And monitoring those as well. You can have an XML sitemap which contains the old URLs which you should see the indexing level drop in Google Search Console as the new URLs get picked up. And you can have one of those for like 3 or 6 months before you delete it and just have XML sitemaps with clean new URLs. But yeah, it's those domain migrations are always very tough. And Miriam, I don't envy you. Good luck with that. It sounds like it's a real pain. I hope you manage to recover the traffic. There's a good question from Goitsen de Vries. It's probably a Dutchman. Hello there. What is your opinion about implementing tags on WordPress websites? I see 5 different indexable URLs covering the exact same content because of the tag. Good question. I think tags add a lot of value in terms of establishing a website's topical authority. And if you have tags which list the exact same articles, then what's the value of that tag? Because obviously the topics are so closely related that the article list is identical across those 2 tags. And you might need to do a bit of content pruning to limit the amount of tags there. And it's very easy to create more tags and add these to articles and content. And there's a risk there of becoming too broad. But tags themselves are very powerful, and I do think you should use them, but you should try and use a fairly narrow set of tags that are about topics that you as a website write about regularly. And they should complement the topics in your top navigation. So they're not the exact same topics. Your top navigation is the main source of Google's interpretation of your website's topical expertise, as in your main navigation links are the topics that you write about the most, that you want to have editorial expertise in. And then the tags allow you to broaden that scope beyond just the navigation links to tell Google, yeah, we also write about all these other related topics. So if you have an SEO link, for example, you can have a link of a tag for tech SEO, a tag for link building, a tag for content, etc., etc. And if there's too much overlap between the tags, if a tag is so broad that it has the same articles in it, then it's probably not a very good tag. And you might need to narrow the tag down to make it a bit more unique and show a unique list of articles for each of those tags. They're not going to be completely unique. There's, of course, going to be articles listed across multiple tag pages. That is fine. But your tag pages shouldn't be so close related to one another that they show the exact same list of articles every single time. They need to be slightly unique and slightly different enough. So I hope that that answers your question, Goitsen. I hope I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but I've been living in Northern Ireland for so long that my Dutch pronunciation is it's become a total nightmare. Another question, this one from Postjan. I'm not even going to try to pronounce your surname. I am so sorry. I hope I get your first name correct. Why would I get different numbers of 404 errors for the same site from Screaming Frog, Ahrefs, etc., called on the same day with the same settings? That's a good question. I think it's because no 2 crawlers are alike, and they all crawl a website slightly differently. I have the same all the time. I use Screaming Frog, Sitebob, and Deep Crawl, and I crawl a website on the same day with all 3 of them, and I get slightly different metrics every single time. I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I think, if you want to fix your 404 errors, you run a crawl, you export the list, you fix those errors, you run another crawl, and you keep doing that and fixing those errors until there's no errors left. It's very hard to get one definitive snapshot of a website, which is quite interesting because Google has the same. When Google crawls your website, there isn't one definitive snapshot of your website either, which is why they keep crawling your website regularly to find new pages and new links. So yeah, every crawler calls the website slightly differently, and sometimes they manage to extract links on a page that another crawler might not necessarily see because the link maybe isn't in a standard Ahrefs tag, or there's some other hiccup along the way when it comes to rendering or processing JavaScript. So it's an interesting one. But yeah, it's not so much about the precise number of pages that you find. It's more about the trend line and running multiple crawls to find those pages over time, especially when you go about fixing them. And like I said before, it's about making those constant improvements over time. So you should crawl your website regularly anyway with one of those crawlers. But yeah, it's an interesting problem, definitely. I'm going to pick another 1 or 2 questions out of the chat before I give myself the blitz treatment. This is a nice one from DS. What are the top 3 most important technical SEO aspects to watch out for in 2022? I'm actually be doing a talk about exactly that in a couple of weeks at a conference in Slovenia. A bit of a highlight where I think things are going to be very interesting in terms of technical SEO for larger websites. It's about finding those marginal gains I talked about, especially when it comes to Google's rendering budget. Google renders web pages in the headless browser, a Chrome browser basically, so that they load all the JavaScript, load all the CSS and images, and get a good holistic view of the web page's user experience, where the different elements are, etc., etc. And I think especially for larger websites, um, it's important that you don't waste too much of Google's effort when it does that, because rendering is quite resource intensive for Google. So that's a big focus, I think, over the next while. I still have hopes in terms of another trend for live indexing. I mean, Bing has been sort of leading the way there, and Google has been trying things out with the live indexing API, but not really happy with the results. And they've said they're not necessarily going to roll that out, but I still have some hopes for it, where rather than waiting for Google to come to our website, we can ping Google and let them know, hey, here's the web page, please index it. But that's probably not going to come true, if I'm honest. But hey, we can hope, we can be optimistic. And the last one, I think it's going to be less important, ironically, to have structured data on your website rather than more important, because Google is getting much better at understanding content and context as well, and doesn't necessarily need the structured data anymore. But that might not happen in the next year. It might be a bit of a longer term thing. But I do think Google is relying less and less on structured data. So that's an interesting one to keep an eye on. I'm still a fan of structured data, and I think you should definitely implement it. But it's probably not as necessary as it was a few years ago, especially when it comes to things like articles and products. Now, I'm going to give myself the very quick blitz treatment as well before we bring on our next guest. So a few blitz questions. Do quick results exist in SEO? Answer is yes, they do exist, especially if you find egregious problems. It's very rare to find a massive problem on a website that can drastically increase traffic. But even in that context, sometimes you make a little tweak to a page, and within a couple of days you get a result with better rankings and better traffic. So don't be discouraged. Generally, SEO is a long-term activity where you build up value and trust over many months, many years, but sometimes you can be surprised by how quick you can get results. Especially if your website has been around for a long time, then sometimes a small tweak can get an instant boost in a very short amount of time. And what do we mean when we talk about short term? What time period is short term SEO? A few weeks minimum. It's very rare for results to happen in a few days. But like I said, it does occasionally happen. But generally, short term, a couple of weeks, couple of months, because most of SEO is more about building long term value over many months and many years. But yeah, short term rankings, short term results do happen in a couple of weeks. I like using KPIs that are directly relevant to the business to show short-term results. It's fantastic if you get a number one ranking for a keyword, but if that keyword doesn't drive traffic, it's not useful. But if the keyword drives traffic but doesn't drive sales, again, it's not very useful. So you have to relate it to the business goals. What is the business trying to achieve, and how is that business funnel being fed? And for some websites, it's just ad impressions, like content publishers. It's mainly about ad impressions. Sometimes it's for paywall signups or registrations of some sort. Sometimes it's for lead generation forms, or with e-commerce, it's fairly direct, people placing orders and buying, and hopefully making them into return customers as well, rather than one-off customers. So always relate your main KPIs to the business goals as well. And I'm going to ask this question to myself as well, that I also asked Aleyda. What is the most important aspect of SEO? Is it content? Is it links? Is it tech SEO? Or is it behavioral factors? I'm a technical SEO guy myself, and I have to be entirely honest, I don't think technical SEO is the most important part of SEO, especially for websites, like I said before, that run on fairly well-built hosted platforms. It's not something you have to worry a lot about. It becomes more important the more complicated and larger website becomes, which for most businesses is just never going to be the case. If anything, I would say content is probably the most important factor in SEO. If you don't have something that people want to read, that people want to engage with, Google is not going to rank it either. So when push comes to shove, content really is king. It's such a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's actually true. And the last one they're going to answer is, how carefully should we follow Google's guidelines? Can you argue with them? I argue with Google's guidelines all the time. There is a gray area there that we can sort of work in. Google is very good at writing about the letter of the law, the technical preciseness of how their systems work and what they want from you as a website. And there's also a spirit of the law, which I'm a big fan of, like, okay, but we can probably get away with things a little bit more. One example would be intrusive interstitials, like an interstitial that you pop up asking for someone's email address. Very powerful tactic. Google doesn't like them, which is fine because users tend to be annoyed by them as well to a certain extent. And the trick is there to make sure they don't pop up straight away, that someone can interact with the page and maybe scroll down a little bit before you show the pop-up. And that way Google doesn't see it as an intrusive interstitial, because people aren't prevented from engaging with the content, and they can directly read the page, and then only like a few seconds later does the interstitial pop up. So that's more of the spirit of the guideline rather than the letter of the guideline. The letter is, don't use interstitials. The spirit is, use them, but be a bit smarter about it and don't make them a huge obstacle. So yeah, it's a little gray areas like that you can get away with, where you can find that golden medium between optimizing your site for Google and still maximizing your own business potential with the website. I hope that was useful. I'm sorry I couldn't answer every single question. I do have an open email policy, and also hit me up on Twitter if you ever want to ask. I'm always happy to help out as much as possible. Let's see what the latest update is with regards to donations. Where are we at the moment? Nearly at 2,500. That's brilliant, excellent. We're starting to get there. Please, keep donating. Keep sending this on to other people and ask them to donate as well. This is a very important cause, and it's all going to the Save the Children Ukraine Relief Fund. So thank you very much. And in a few minutes, we'll bring on our next guest, Kristina. Yes, our next guest is Kristina Azarenko. Welcome, Kristina. Welcome.
Hi everyone. I'm so happy to be here. And yes, donate, because this is really, really important.
I don't think we've ever had a proper conversation, have we? I've been a fan of yours for many years, and I think this is the first time we actually get to talk.
Yeah, I think so. And it's mutual. I've been your fan for many years as well.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. You're making me blush. So, Kristina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Kristina Azarenko. I'm currently based in Canada, Toronto, and I have a consultancy which is called Marketing Syrup, where I help e-commerce, mostly e-commerce type websites, scale using SEO as a tool. And I also teach people SEO as well. So that's me, and I have more than 10 years of hands-on experience. And I've worked on agency side, I've worked in-house, and now I'm working solo. So I have these different aspects of how SEO and how organizations treat SEO in different scenarios. So it helps me a lot in my daily job.
Brilliant. Yeah, you have a good holistic view of SEO in different contexts. Exactly. So yeah, we're going to be talking about e-commerce SEO tactics for short-term wins. I have a few prepared questions, and hopefully we get some other questions in the chat throughout the course of our discussion here. And I want to start with one of the prepared questions. First aid problem solving. I love that terminology. What are typical on-page issues and traps, and how do people fix those and solve those?
Yeah, I think, oh my God, I don't want to sound too old school, but that's true. Like what I see in many websites is that they don't usually use title tags properly. Especially, I hate it when I go to the home page of a website and it's about any website. It's not about e-commerce, and it says just home there. This is my least favorite thing ever, especially if you're not connected with homes or anything like that. So the biggest thing that people can use right now is, first of all, to make sure that their title tags make sense. Then I would also say definitely the content on the page, but here is like we have different types of pages. There can be category, product pages, blog post pages. So the content that you put there will depend on the type of the page. And also make sure that you have only those pages that are needed, and you don't have those pages, like, for example, too many filters, too many pages that are duplicates or near duplicates on the website. So I would say having the pages that are important and that actually help you bring organic traffic to the website and convert it, and making sure that those pages have proper title tags and have content depending on what type of page this is.
Yeah, I'm still surprised how often websites still have the home title tag on there. I think I
Right?
come across one like every week, and it's still like, 2022. How are we still in this place? I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm going to ask you a question on my own because I know you're really, really good on the e-commerce stuff and on technical SEO as well. So I want to pick your brains a little bit, specifically on faceted navigation in the context of e-commerce, which is great for end users, but potentially problematic for Google. Can you talk a little bit about why it's problematic for Google and what would be the best solutions in handling faceted navigation on e-commerce category pages?
Oh yeah, I love faceted navigation. So basically, faceted navigation is the navigation that helps you drill down to specific types of the products that users are looking for. So for example, if we talk about, I don't know, sneakers, it can help, the faceted navigation will help you go to sneakers for men, let's say. Then the color would be green, and then for example, brand Adidas. So, and a store would usually have lots of these options. So think about how many potential options there can be, because you can use two options like color and brand. You can use only like, for example, gender and color, all these kind of options. And if each of them creates a new URL that is available for Google to crawl, that creates a nightmare, just because Google wastes all of this crawling budget. And I know you mentioned, Barry, in your talk, that you don't need to worry about crawl budget if you don't have like millions of pages. That's true, but even like small, exactly, like I agree with you. And small, not small, like medium-sized store that has too many facet pages can easily bloat this whole index by letting Google crawl and index all those pages.
Yes. I'll
So
bring up a small anecdote here myself to demonstrate that. I had a client once who did 1,500 products. They had about 4,000 actual pages, including all the categories. But Google found 8
it
million
is not a lot,
URLs. No, 8 million
right?
URLs because of the faceted
Yeah,
navigation. So that's the scale of the problem we're talking about.
exactly. That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. So yeah, so this is the problem. Okay, so what's the solution? So it depends on how, on the system that you, like on the platform that you're using, and also if it makes sense to actually leave some of these pages indexable. In my preferred situation, like how I usually approach it, I make sure that these faceted navigation can be used to create some of the pages that we have control of, that we can actually put the title tag on, right? That it will make sense, that the URL might look at least not that bad without all this lots of parameters there. So some of the pages that make sense to be crawled and indexed, they should stay crawled and indexed, but you need to have control over it. That's really important. Control, when it comes to faceted navigation, control is what really matters. And you also use either canonicals, but it still means that Google uses lots of its resources to still see these canonicals. So ideally, you'd need to use no index to make sure that those pages that you don't want to be indexed are not indexed at all. And a while ago, I had a talk about creating about a framework, 8-step framework of creating subcategory pages based on the filters, so basically on the faceted navigation. And it used exactly this. So we chose the parameters that would make new pages. And in that case, in that example, these were like t-shirts. And we can have colors, and we can also have Is it V-neck or short sleeve, or this kind of thing? And then the rest would be just not indexed. Another way could be using Ajax for faceted navigation in general, and then create like landing pages for specific subcategories, not dependable on your like on your faceted navigation. So when somebody is using your faceted navigation, the results are loaded without reloading the page, so the URL doesn't actually change. But you can also have like on top of that specific landing pages for, let's say, V-neck t-shirts for women. If you see that this is a real search that people would need to a page for, so a lot of research needs to be done before you actually go into this stage.
And how would you go about doing that research? Is it just a matter of using a keyword research tool and give you some suggestions, or what would your preferred approach be?
Yeah, so of course, keyword research, yes. And what I would definitely do is, okay, if I have a website and if it's this store and they have real user information, and I love real user information, and they track searches on the website, and for example, if a website used to have these filters that would have different URLs, I would definitely check Google Analytics and see what filters people were using. So it's like real data for this specific website, plus data on what users in general are searching for online using keyword research.
Yeah, brilliant. Very useful. What would be your top tips to get quick results in the context of e-commerce? What can a small e-commerce website do to see a relatively quick uplift in traffic and rankings?
Yeah, so first of all, I would concentrate on category pages first, because for most, not for all websites, because I saw some websites that would concentrate on products. It will depend on what you're selling, but in most cases, the category pages would be the ones that would drive the biggest amount of traffic. So I would make sure that those category pages are optimized. Again, title tags. And how to do this quickly is you can have templates, title tags templates, where you would use variables to pull into this title tag. So for example, color, brand, or something like that, like WordPress does it, Magento does it. You can pull the variables to the title tag so that you don't need to have a person to write each and every title tag and manually put it on the category page. So that's the first thing, how to do this quickly. Of course, then with all the incremental changes, you can update these title tags manually and make sure that they are even better optimized if you find some keywords that your templates might not carry. So, and also I would make sure that, again, getting back to the previous advice, I would create some more category pages that make sense. Because sometimes, and here's an example, sometimes websites would think like, okay, we are selling gifts for children, amazing. But people are also looking for things like baby gifts, or this can be the same, but for newborn gifts and children gifts are different things. So if you assume that people that are looking for newborn gifts will find you because you have children gifts category, it might not work. Gifts for newborn girls and versus newborn boys and all this kind of stuff. So how can you go more granular to make sure that you are there, especially for a long tail keywords when people are searching for them? So I would look into this too. And it doesn't mean that you need to create like thousands and thousands of pages. You can start with like one or two, and I saw examples of how successful it can be, like 1 or 2 pages. But then you appear in the new searches for the new audience, and it's like it helps a lot.
Absolutely. This is a related question that was asked earlier, which I didn't get around to at the time. It's from Evgenia. asked at 3:29, so yeah, more than half an hour ago, how to rank higher in search for newly launched blog pages on an e-commerce website. So you have an e-commerce site and you're sticking along, you're launching a blog. How do you get traction in that blog fairly quickly?
So I would say that it doesn't matter whether it's an e-commerce website and the blog is on e-commerce website or any other website. It's just like how to rank a blog post quicker. Well, first of all, it should be on a topic that is previously researched versus, oh my God, I have this amazing idea. I just need to write a post and publish it as quickly as possible. So first of all, you need to write about the topic that people are searching for. Secondly, your blog post should answer this topic properly, and it should also have like basically subtopics, and should be properly structured with headings so that you don't only like answer your specific question, but you also touch on subtopics that, for example, people might search for in People Also Ask Questions or on different forums. So I'd say that this is more about, not about the question of how do I rank a page, a blog post that I just posted. It's more like, how do I make research properly to write the post that will be ranked better in really short time. And it's also possible. And I would definitely recommend do this research, do like what people are searching for, what additional topics about this main topic you're writing about people are searching for, and structure your post not just so that people can skim, and also like you have headings there, and make sure that you check the so you have like a couple of main keywords for this post. Check the content that already exists in the search results for these keywords. Can you make your post better? So that's basically the answer, because once you publish it, it's not like everything is lost. No, once you publish it, it's not the first step in like ranking your content. It's actually not really important when you publish it. It's all the research that goes before you publish it matters.
Yes. I fully agree. As an interesting question, this also relates to something that was asked earlier by Magnus, and now Sylvia has a similar question in the chat. It's about duplicate content. Now, is duplicate content like identical product text for products that exist in multiple categories, or even slightly different products? How big of a problem is it, and what can we do to mitigate that?
Yeah, so I think it's a quite big problem, especially for some websites. Of course, like I can't say that for all websites, because not all websites will have this problem, but it's a fairly common problem in the e-commerce world. So basically, when it comes to products belonging to different categories, and this is the same product, what I usually recommend is having product URLs that are not dependable on the user journey, and they're not dependable on the categories they belong to. So for example, if a product belongs to like 3 categories and you have indication of each of these categories in the product URL, then if I go through one user journey, like, I don't know, black sneakers for women, then I'll end up on one URL. But then if I go through black sneaker, first for women, but then color black, it will be a different URL. This behavior means that the URL is by journey dependable, and I would not stick to those URLs. So one thing that you can do here is to remove categories altogether from the URLs. Big established store, you don't want to jump right onto like changing the URLs. Maybe it would be better to use canonical tags and choose only one, like let's say you have 3 URLs, only one of them will be canonical URL, and the 2 will be canonicalizing this first canonical URL. So again, it depends on how big the problem is and how big and established your store is. If you just started, then it's okay to just update the URLs and make sure that you have redirects in place. But if you have like thousands of pages, I would not do this. I would not do this altogether for the whole website, because it can backfire exactly as Barry talked about when it comes to different migrations. And the other thing is, and so I hear people a lot asking me, okay, I have like millions and millions of products. How do I optimize them? And in most of the situations, when people have millions and millions of products, it means that they have URL, a separate URL for each variation of their product. So I had one guy asking me, like telling me that he used to have like, I think it was kind of rod or something with orange dots and with green dots. And he would have different URLs for each of them. Well, it would make sense to have different URL for a product if these different options are searched for. Like, for example, I can't think of an example right now, but in this scenario when it's just a rod with like different color of points there, I don't think that actually people care about this and they search for it at all. Of course, it's a good idea to check, but for this one, I'm sure people are not searching for this. So don't create the pages that you don't need. This is the bottom line. So basically, you can have one product page for this rod, and then you can have color swatches. So basically, choosing the options that will live on the same URL. So it means that from millions of URLs, you can already have thousands. And then it's much easier to go from there because, again, you can have templated title tags, and you can like make sure that your URLs are not by journey dependable, exactly what I talked about previously. But yeah, make sure that these two things are in place.
Which brings me on to another very closely related topic. I work with some e-commerce clients that sell other people's products, like they're not the manufacturer themselves, and they tend to use standard manufacturing descriptions for their products, which means they probably have the same content as most of their competing websites. What would you say to that? Is that okay, and you then focus on other signals, or should they rewrite the content?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, it introduces a problem of like duplicated content across multiple domains. And so duplicate content is basically when the same content is seen on different pages. But if you just have like just description of a product, is not the whole duplication of the whole page that from the manufacturer. So Google looks at your page overall to see like what percentage of this content is duplicate, which means that, okay, you might have some duplicate content which is from the manufacturer, but if it's just tiny percentage of the whole page, it might not be a huge issue. Secondly, there are other ways that you can add more unique content to your website. So, for example, reviews specifically from your website about you as a distributor, not the manufacturer, but the distributor. The reviews would be unique, and they would basically generate unique content for this particular page. Secondly, you can have people asking questions about this product and answering those questions, like basically FAQ, either it's user generated or it's created by you. You can do this as well. And yeah, so basically also what I love is adding new photos as well, if it's possible. Of course, it might not be possible for all kinds of products, but adding new photos compared to the manufacturers can help as well, so that it looks a little bit different. But the bottom line here is that if the content that is copied from the manufacturer does not take a huge percentage of the page, that's fine. If it takes a huge percentage of the page, I would look into rewriting it at least a little bit, at least part of it, or maybe using just part of this content and then adding yours. Yeah, so these are the techniques that I use and I would recommend. But at the end of the day, it all depends on how dependable you are on the manufacturer, and whether you can actually, because sometimes you might not be allowed to rewrite the content. There are like legal consequences here, so we need to make sure that SEO guidelines and legal consequences meet together, because we don't want to sacrifice legal and have any legal issues.
That's a good point.
Yeah,
That's a very good point.
yeah.
Another question that I think is also relevant today. We talk about a lot of quick results today, but what are the things that we can do to optimize a website that don't necessarily give quick results, but that we definitely should be doing anyway?
Yeah, I would. So I remember when I once worked at an agency, I introduced one thing as basically pacing. You know, like people in PPC, they would have pacing, which means they check regularly all the keywords and how things are going, because it's very dynamic there, more dynamic than in SEO. And I introduced basically the same for SEO. So you basically do pacing depending on how big a client is, every 2 weeks or every month or something like that. So it's, on the one hand, it's monitoring, making sure that there are no issues, and Content King, like apps like Content King, help with it as well, because sometimes the website might have get no indexed, and then Google removes request indexing, talking about a story of that happened with one of my clients. But so monitoring the website and making sure that it's in good health, this is one part. And the second part, finding your opportunities, looking at them, looking at what's going on in the competitor landscape, making sure that your website is accessible, that it's fast. Doesn't necessarily mean that you need to spend hours of developer work to make sure that you tick all the core vital things, but it just means that it should be quick enough, especially if you're in e-commerce. It's also speed also influences conversion, so it's important as well. Also, what I love doing, especially in e-commerce, is monitoring site searches, and it gives me ideas of what pages can be created. And also sometimes you would have things like, and it's more about conversion rate optimization, but misspellings, and people don't get any results, any search results when they're looking for something. And another thing, just thought about that, is making sure that when you have a dynamic stock and some of your products come and go, like become out of stock, and then having processes in place to make sure that it doesn't harm your SEO.
I love the site search tip. I think it's an underappreciated aspect. The value of, looking at what kind of queries people type in your own internal site search engine on your website, because it tells you so much about how people use your own website. Love that tip. Love that tip. I want to wrap up with the quickfire round that I've done with Aleyda and with the voices in my own head. So I'm going to do them with you as well. Do quick results exist in SEO?
Yes, they do. Especially, I had a client who came to me and their website was not indexed, so it was really, really quick results.
Fair enough. Short term, what time period are we talking about when we talk about short term in SEO?
I think it will be like a couple of weeks at least, unless your website is not indexed and you just index it. But yeah, it would be a couple of weeks at least.
Yeah, I agree. What kind of indicators can show that a quick result is achieved? What kind of KPIs should we be looking at?
Well, KPIs should be agreed on before you even start working. And what I usually like looking at, like, of course, traffic, but traffic is secondary, and traffic is mostly for me. And these would be hard and soft conversions. So, for example, if it's an online store, a hard conversion is a sale, a soft conversion is adding to cart. So, or for example, if you have also a blog post and you drive traffic there, there can be email subscribers, and then you can remarket to them, and like not remarket, but then you can reach them with email marketing. It's also going to be a soft conversion, because it's important. Sometimes people don't buy right away. Sometimes they need time, but SEO has helped to produce this soft conversion, like either adding to cart or subscribing to newsletter, and basically it's all channels working together.
Excellent. Probably the most controversial question: what is the most important aspect of SEO? Is it content? Is it links? Is it technical SEO? Is it behavioral factors?
Well, I think overall content is the most important part, but also it depends on the period of, like, on the stage of the website and period of time where and period for this website. What I mean by that, if you just migrated and your website is not working, your website like this, well, content might not be the most important part. Or if you move to JavaScript framework that Google can't even like see and read your content, no matter how amazing it is, Google won't find it. So in most of the cases, this would be content, but like with technical SEO, at least supporting to make sure that this content is indexed and crawled by Google. And of course, like, links are important, but I would not do shady things there. And behavioral, for me, it's if your content is correct, if you are doing everything like properly on that site, plus technical SEO in terms of site speed, then behavioral factors, they will be fine.
Brilliant. I fully agree on the content bit. Last question: how carefully should you follow Google's guidelines?
Okay, so sometimes, and okay, a random example here. I love random examples. I'll be quick, I promise. So sometimes you wake up on Monday and you think, okay, I want to wake up every day at 5 p.m. And then you do for 2 days, but you tell everyone that I wake up at 5 p.m. Even though that you don't wake up at 5 p.m. on like Friday and Thursday of that week. I wake up at 5 p.m. is what Google tells us. And what usually happens is that it doesn't wake up at 5 p.m. on Thursday and Fridays. So in the ideal world, yes, everything is exactly what Google guidelines say, but they're more about where Google wants to go versus where Google is right now exactly. So it's, making sure that you follow them, but also finding the ways how you can experiment with some aspects, not without being spammy, without like these kind of shady things, but still there can be different approaches to the one thing. And so it just means that sometimes what Google says is good to follow, but you can experiment on other stuff.
Yes, I agree. It's a bit of a gray area there. Yes, that was brilliant. Thank you so much, Kristina, for donating your time and sharing all your insights with everybody. Really appreciate it. People who are watching, if you get any value from this at all, if you've learned anything at all from any of us today so far, and you haven't yet donated, please do donate. It's for a very worthy cause. Let's have a look at where we are at the moment with our donation score. We're up to $2,600. Still a long way to go, but it's really appreciated, people. So if you get any value from this at all and you haven't yet donated, please donate if you can. We really appreciate it. It's going to the Save the Children campaign in the Ukraine, and it's a very worthy cause. Thank you.
Yes.
And now let me introduce the last guest of today. Hours has flown by the way. It's been very quick. I really appreciate everybody sticking with us. The next one, well, I don't think you need an introduction, Barry, but I'm going to try and give you one anyway. Barry Schwartz is probably the most prolific blogger in the SEO industry. with tens of thousands of articles under his belt about Google updates, changes in Google's ecosystem, anything relevant to SEO, what Googlers have been saying. And if anybody who works in SEO has not read one of his articles, you're probably not really in SEO. So welcome, Barry Schwartz.
Hey, thanks for having me.
That's
Great
brilliant.
to be here.
Brilliant to have you.
I heard you telling me before that only if people actually got something out of this should they donate. You don't have to get anything out of this to donate. Just donate anyway. That's my point, I guess.
Fair point. That's a very good point to make. Please donate, people. Please donate. We really, really appreciate it, and it goes to a very good cause. So, Barry, I want to talk to you about, well, I could probably talk to you for hours. I don't think we've ever had a proper face-to-face conversation on anything. I mean, we've been talking online on Twitter occasionally for, well, years. I don't think we've ever had this sort of one-to-one chat. So I'm going to seize the opportunity and probably bombard you with all kinds of different questions. But we have some pre-prepared questions I want to shoot your way to get us all started. Starting with quick wins in general, what is Google's view on a quick SEO wins? Are they sort of a no-go area? Does Google want you to do this the hard way, or are there ways where we can get quick wins?
I'll just say it depends. I'm just joking. No, it really does depend. I mean, there's some quick wins. Obviously, if your website just has no title tags and it's this homepage, or if there's the pages can't be indexed or crawled or whatever, and you just fix those. Those are very, very quick wins. I think we heard some of those stories before. I have stories as well, but I'm not going to go into the specific stories. But basically, there's lots of quick wins for people who have no idea what they're doing when it comes to SEO. When it comes to people who know what they're doing with SEO, like us Barrys, there are no real quick wins. You just got to put your effort in. You got to, write 40, 50,000 blog posts in 20,000 years. And you just got to keep on going at it until you convince somebody that you're kind of an authority in the space. So yeah, I don't think there's really quick wins outside of like finding mistakes and fixing those mistakes, which in some cases are super easy and in some cases are not. I'll give the quick story. Like there was a team of, I do these SEO calls rarely. Like people will hire me. I say, I don't do SEO. And they'll be like, no, we just want an hour of your time. So I say, I only meet with your SEOs because I don't want to like talk to non-SEOs. So I'll talk to them. There was I had a call with, I don't know, probably like 10 SEOs in a Fortune 500 company, and they couldn't figure out why a page was not being indexed. I refused to look at any things before I actually start the SEO call. Give me the information on the call. That's when the clock ticks, I guess, because we're all very busy. In a matter of 60 seconds, they give me the URL. I'm like, you're blocking with no robot, something like block. I forgot what it was, robots.txt or something was blocking it. And I'm like, just remove that, you're good to go. And all those SEOs were like, what? And sometimes like when you're so in the weeds on your own website, you miss the most obvious. And sometimes those are quick wins, even if you're, a detailed SEO. So yeah, it depends on the situation. And there are quick wins if you don't know what you're doing.
I love that. I wish I could make my own client calls that I'm only talking to the in-house SEOs and not the whole management team. Although sometimes I get interesting insights from people outside of SEO, especially the developers have some really keen, interesting things to say because they come with different perspectives and different priorities.
For sure.
And yes, I fully agree that I get paid by clients an awful lot to point out what they tend to already know, but they need someone else to sort of point it out before anybody takes any action on that. So I love that. I want to talk about Google updates for a little bit. It's one of those things that comes around all the time. Websites get affected by Google updates either intentionally because they're crap websites or unintentionally because for some reason or another, they sort of fall foul of whatever tweaks Google has been making in their algorithms. And what can you do as a website owner to sort of immunize yourself from that, to protect yourself against, the ups and downs of Google updates?
I mean, there's no immunity. I mean, you could have like the best website in the world and still be hit by these updates. I understand why people say don't panic when a Google update hits and your site gets hit. But at the same time, you've been in the space for a long time, you've seen sites get hit. And if you see your traffic drop by 50, 60, 70, 80% after a Google update, and you have a whole staff of employees and warehouse inventory, and you got to go ahead and pay those bills, I don't blame them for panicking. So Nobody's been immune. I mean, some of the large, even Google penalized themselves historically for doing things. So if Google could penalize themselves for something, and nobody's really immune, of course, the algorithms are looking for the most quality and most, authoritative and most, informational and useful information out there. And that's what you should be doing, is producing the best type of content so that you will not be hit by any of these quality algorithm updates, like these core updates or product reviews updates. But it doesn't mean you won't be. Google's algorithms make mistakes. AI makes mistakes. And there's nothing really foolproof. But the best thing you can do is just make sure that your users are happy when they read their content. You could put polls and surveys on your site to make sure you're covering everything you might want to cover. You might have somebody who doesn't know anything about the topic read that page and say, what questions do you have after they read that piece of content? Maybe you could fill in those blanks. Because really, Google tends to want to rank stuff that's really long form, where that has everything in there. But yet, Google shows this 3 or 4 line featured snippet that only shows you a snippet of that information because Google knows nobody wants to read it. So that kind of like that quasi moronic thing type of thing, where Google's like, give us the most amount of content. We know users don't want to read it. We'll give them a little snippet of it. But you have to build the best type of content out there, and assume somebody will benefit from different snippets of that content. So yeah, I think that's the way to go about it. But keep in mind that nothing is foolproof.
No, absolutely. I often work with some companies who've been around for a very long time, and they feel that they earned the right to be number one just by virtue of being the oldest or one of the oldest and the most established business. And Google doesn't see it that way. You have to send the right signals to Google and not just rely on your status as an offline business to guarantee your online success. A lot of people, especially when it comes to finding quick results and quick wins in SEO, rely on what we would call bad advice. Can you maybe give us some examples that you've seen over the years and stuff you definitely want to avoid when it comes to trying to find the quick wins?
Right. So I guess in the old days, like maybe 20 years ago, if you wanted to get quick wins, you would just get a lot of links, pay for links, or you join these link networks or PBNs, and it would work wonderfully. And the problem is a lot of people get into the space and they know, or maybe they read an article that worked and they said, oh, this works very well. And they're like, oh, I'm going to buy some links. I'm going to go ahead and join this link network. Generally, those tend not to work anymore. And if they do work, they're not going to work too long, and then you get penalized, and something you don't want to go down that route. So quick wins generally, like in general, if it sounds too easy, sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true. So that's like one example. But there are some quick wins you could do. Like right now, web stories, like nobody's doing that, and Google tends to rank those things pretty well in the search results. So
yeah,
I mean,
but
it's a quick win.
The AMP, Barry.
The AMP, I get it, and it's not going to last a long time because AMP has died many, many, many times, and it probably will die again. But right now, I mean, if you want to rank well for SEO, I mean, you could probably do a web story and rank pretty well in a matter of no time. But in general, like those are exceptions to the rule. Google releases a new feature. That feature is not utilized too much by the majority of the publishing world. The few that use that feature will then benefit for that period of time until everybody sees that it works and everybody else goes into that feature and starts optimizing for that feature until it's oversaturated. And Google's like, oh, it's too much. We're going to go ahead and remove that or increase the bar in terms of how you can actually show off for that feature. Examples are review snippets, stars, all that type of videos. Google would basically show all of it no matter what. And then eventually like, well, the search results have too much on it. We got to go ahead and increase the bar in terms of who could actually show up for those types of things. So yeah, stay away from quick wins in general, unless it's kind of like a new feature and then you want to invest in it and knowing that it might go away in several months or so. Buying, spinning up content, like just taking scraper tools and spinning up those content, that's a bad idea. Keyword stuffing, hidden text. I mean, it's just go to the Google Webmaster Guidelines, type in Google Webmaster Guidelines and just read the list. Stay away from all those things. That's just like SEO 101 not to do.
Which brings me to an interesting topic, by the way, Google documentation. I feel it's evolved a lot over the years, but there's still some obvious gaps that sometimes they don't describe really important issues or the documentation is out of date. For example, the pagination stuff was massively out of date until they suddenly realized, oh yeah, we haven't actually used these pagination tags in many years.
Yeah.
What's your view on the Google documentation? They have gotten better at it, I think, but they can probably improve even more. What do you think?
Yeah, in general, everybody's documentation could improve better. So that's just in general. I mean, I have different software applications and so forth, and it's just hard to keep up with all the change. Like if you're constantly pushing out new changes, and Google, they tested like 800,000 new features and pushed out tens of thousands of changes in 1 year. And because of that, it's just really hard to keep up to date on that documentation. If you even look at it, like, I had a little SaaS product or different like mobile apps that we distribute, and having documentation that's constantly updating is a full-time job. And Google has done a lot better with that. I mean, they have Lizzie Sohn or Smith. I think she got married and changed her name. So, but they have a lot of help doc writers in Google right now, working across all the platforms, including Google Search. And they've vastly improved that. I mean, the amount of consolidation and improvement and clarification they make to their docs. They even put timestamps at the bottom of the pages so you know when it was updated. So us SEOs could be like, oh, they added this word. What does this word mean now that they added, or they removed this word? So what does that mean when they removed it? So it's kind of like this, like, all right, the documentation's so good now that we analyze it, but did Google's writer who wrote that really understand the implication of writing this word versus that word? And we kind of like analyze all that type of stuff. And then Google's like, why do we even bother? Why do we even share this information? Because we're just like ripping it apart and ripping it to shreds.
Yeah, which brings me also to another point, ripping it to shreds. We tend to analyze every single tweet that people like John Mueller, Gary Ilyas, and Martin Split and others put out there. And I think sometimes it's useful also to have a bit of a record there, what was said, and build it up over time. But I can imagine it's tough for them as well, that they have to be very careful what they say and how they say it.
Yeah, it's funny because me, I'm the type of person that for years been documenting what different Googlers have been saying, from Matt Cutts back in the old day, Google guy, to Adam Lasnik, to obviously John Mueller and Gary and so forth, and all the new players. And if one person contradicts themselves or contradicts somebody else, what they maybe somebody said 10 years previously, I'll point it out, and they'll be like, oh God. So when I joined those hangouts with John Mueller, he's like, oh, it's Barry, yay. And because I'm basically looking for new things that haven't been said, or things that have been said a different way, and trying to say, how could this help the SEO community to know, like, maybe this has changed slightly, maybe Google's view is less strict on this or is more strict on that. And I think that's helpful for us to look into, but it makes it really stressful for people like the John Muellers and so forth on that team. But I think he's been doing this for a long time, so I think he understands it. Early on, I know, what was it? News publishing world. So you remember when Google had first click free or something, first 3 clicks were free. Mm-hmm. And John Mueller's initially, when he first got a job there, he was like, that's cloaking, you can't do that. And I'm like, Matt Cutts, maybe you should tell John that it's not cloaking, it's a first click free program. So these things happen where, often Googlers, especially new Googlers, just don't know all the stuff that, historically that's there, because they joined the company maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, and they just don't keep up to date with it. So it's tough for them, but at the same time, we have to keep them on their toes, and that's our job of SEOs, to drive them crazy.
Yeah, I can imagine. I wouldn't want to be John Mueller. The man has the patience of a saint. It's amazing. Yeah. Speaking of that, by the way, you get harassed relatively regularly on Twitter as well. Well, harassed is maybe a strong word, but the not new thing. You're the first one to report new features, and people not ask you all the time, Barry Schwartz, is this new? Yes or no?
Yeah. So one is, I do get actually harassed. I've been threatened and stuff like that, like shoot the messenger type of stuff. So it's calmed down a lot since for the past few years or so. But there have been times where people just want to shoot the messenger, which is totally cool. But in terms of is this new? It's interesting. I like it, because new features, like we said, like the web stories and stuff like that, new features can actually provide an opportunity for SEOs and for search marketers to actually utilize. So people want to, if something's new, I kind of want to be like, yeah, this is a new feature. You should look into it, be aware of it, and so forth. It's not just like maybe a Google Search Console feature, but maybe a user interface feature where Google has tweaked something on the front end that may increase or decrease exposure. Often these things come up with Google building out features that replace the need for showing the search results, like product reviews. Like, just this morning I posted about about basically around how Google has these comparisons and so forth of, comparing products next to each other, and they're expanding that feature. And how does that affect affiliate marketers or, whatever? So search marketers knowing what Google's testing versus what Google launched and what maybe Google tested in the past and how it's evolved is very, very important for them to know how that can impact their click-through rates, how that can impact their rankings in Google search, and how that might impact their actual bottom line in terms of revenues and sales through their website.
Do you see trends there when you monitor search features that Google is trying something and then maybe stops that test and comes back to that test several months or several years later in a slightly different format?
So there's no specific trend with that. Sometimes Google will test something and then like 1 week, and then a week later launch it fully. Sometimes Google will test something for literally several years, never launch it, but keep testing it over several years, and then never launch it. So there's no real rhyme or reason. I think sometimes Google just constantly loves to run these tests. That's why they can say they ran 800,000 tests. It's just tests running constantly. Yeah. It's insane if you think about it. But I've never seen a specific pattern to it. Meaning, the first time I covered one of the biggest tests is when Google launched universal search back in like 2010 or so. I forgot what year it was.
2007.
Where Google, and Google would basically, instead of showing 10 blue links, it would show not just the web search results, it would show images, video, news, all in the main search results. And that was like mind blowing. So I covered those tests, and then I got a phone call from NBC, which is a major network in America, saying, "Do you want to be on the Brian Williams show?" Before Brian Williams had all his scandals in the news world. I'm like, sure. So I went to the NBC studios in Rockefeller Center, and they interviewed me about that when it was launching. I recorded for about 45 minutes to an hour. I got about 3 or 4 seconds of airtime on NBC, but it's fun to break stuff because these things actually matter, not just to searchers, which obviously use it. They don't really realize the things are changing, but more so to publishers and search marketers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's important to have that record and to have you keep everybody honest, I suppose, to a certain extent. Now, the question here in the comments relating to something that was said earlier, how do web stories actually work?
So basically, it's like a duplicate version of your web page. It doesn't have to be. It's basically another URL on your site that is formatted kind of like a Instagram story or YouTube short, kind of. You can embed videos, you can embed pictures. There's not much content to it. It's more of like a visual. It used to be called visual stories or AMP stories. Then I think it went from AMP stories to web stories to visual stories. So they also constantly change names of their products, not just change features. Mm-hmm. And it's basically a visual look at a specific type of feature. It only shows up on mobile search. So if you do a search for, let's say, SEO, you might see a web story. You click on it. It'll basically be like Instagram slides, or I'm not even sure. I'm not a big Instagrammer, but basically you can just click on a story. It'll open up a visual look at it, and you can just slide through that. And not much content, mostly visual stuff, images and videos with some text overlaying it.
Yeah, it's basically Instagram stories, but for the web. That's what it is. So short video snippets or short photos with captions, things like that. And you build it with technology that's based on AMP, basically. I want to fire some quick questions at you. You don't have to give a quick answer, but you can if you want. It could be just a yes or no. It could be a long monologue if you want. We sort of covered the first one of the quick results. Is this an SEO? Yeah, they sort of do. But when we talk about quick results, what time frame are we talking about? What is a quick result in SEO?
So generally, SEO takes, any SEO from what I read and heard, long-term SEO engagements take somewhere between 6 months to over a year in terms of what SEOs, when they send out a contract, this is what you'll see, and this is their timeline you'll see it in. But quick wins could literally happen in minutes. If you're in the new publishing world, you could publish something and you have a quick win because you published something that was trending and you got a lot of traffic from it. Removing, no index and having Google crawl your website, placing your title tags with something that's unique and not repetitive across every single page, like homepage across all your pages. Those are absolute quick wins that you can see within minutes to hours to weeks. Generally, SEO is slower. It's not like Google Ads where you just pay Google and the ads go up almost immediately. Generally, SEO requires, there's a slower pace to it.
I don't know, but I found these results on.
Sorry. and basically what happens is you will go ahead and take the change. Google then has to crawl the website. After Google crawls the website, Google then has to index that information and then put it in their database, and then Google has to then serve that content to the users. So that process can lag from how often the page gets crawled Could be hours to minutes. It could be weeks to months to Google crawl that page. So it really depends on all those types of things going on. And then it depends on the database itself. Sometimes like vertical search engines like Google Images versus Google Video versus Google News. Google News is tremendously fast, whereas Google Image Search is generally slow to update. So those are the types of things, and all these different variables that come into play there.
Yeah. Speaking of Google and crawling pages slowly, I found an error in the client Google Search Console recently for a page that Google said was last crawled in September 2018. So yeah, the page had long been fixed. I don't even think the page existed anymore, but Google was still reporting the error. So there we go. Google sometimes needs a helping hand as well. I know you don't really do SEO yourself that much, but you're probably the most well-read person on SEO in the world because of all the content you consume and then put out there as well. So how would you define quick success in SEO? What kind of KPIs would we be looking at?
So again, that depends on the business model. So if it's a publisher, it might be about, it used to be about page views. It might be about engagement. It might be about ad revenue generated from the pages. For an e-commerce site, it's probably just about revenue generated through the website. For maybe a B2B company, it might be about like a white page being downloaded or a contact form being called, filled out, or a phone number being called. So each one has its own goals and success factors, and all these analytic tools that you might use always have these conversion metrics which let you plug in what is the value of this conversion. It could be obviously based on revenue, based on a sale that you make through the website, or it might be the value of somebody filling out a form or downloading a white paper. So each business has its own success factors, and I think you need to define that sometimes even on a page-by-page basis. Some people even define that based on the referring source and then the page. It depends on how complicated you want to get, but generally it depends on the specific situation, the query, and the page people landing on.
Absolutely. Fully agree. Probably my most controversial question. What is the most important aspect of SEO? Is it content? Is it links? Is it tech SEO? Or is it behavioral factors?
I'm a content guy. I'm going to go with content. I mean, all those things, you have great content, it leads to better behavioral metrics. It leads to generally more engagement. It leads to generally leads to links. The one thing it doesn't necessarily lead to is technical SEO, but the more users you have on your website, the more likely they will notice technical issues, and it won't fix your technical SEO issues. But generally, I would start with content. Most CMS platforms these days are pretty technically sound. It's just not like the old days where you had a CMS platform that every single time you went to a specific page on your website, it would generate a new session ID and that would create a new URL factor. Remember those old days? Those were fun. So any CMS platform was not search engine friendly, and it was just a complete disaster. But now, like WordPress, Wix, even whatever, Duda or whatever, they're all pretty search engine friendly.
Yeah, I think content comes first for everything. I think before you even design a website, you should have the content for the website more or less ready. This is an interesting question. I haven't asked anybody else, but I want to ask them to you. What's the most important knowledge or skills you need in order to be able to make a living out of SEO?
I guess you need to, that's a good question. It depends on what SEO you are. I mean, there's so many different types of SEOs. You could be a good technical SEO, and then you need to know how to, some programming. You could be a content SEO, and you have to know how to write good content and need to know no programming at all. I guess in general, it's just the skill you probably want, or the attribute you probably want, is to basically always wanting to be learning and always want change and embrace change. Because one thing in the SEO community that happens all the time, it's constant change. And if you can't live with change, this profession is probably not for you.
No, that's for sure. There's no such thing as routine in SEO, is there? Love that answer. Last question. How carefully should you follow Google's guidelines? Can you argue with them?
You probably, especially for newbies, you definitely should follow them. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be testing things on the side. I wouldn't test and explore how far you could push those guidelines on a big corporate website that you want to go ahead and potentially get hurt. But I would, keep it safe with your clients. I would test things on your own, sites that you're willing to burn down if they go and get hit. I would communicate any grayness on those guidelines with if you have a strategy you want to implement with the client, I would communicate it with the client, tell them about the risks and rewards that you want to try, and they have to improve it. But in general, I would definitely, recommend, if you write a book on SEO, you shouldn't be putting down black hat tactics, because, those will go away in a week. So usually when somebody's watching this video, or somebody is, reading a piece of content about guidelines, you want to be the most strict about that and say, no, don't go against any guidelines ever, because it depends on the situation. And of course, you need to consult an expert that's been doing this for a long time. But generally, I would say stick with those guidelines and don't cross them if you can.
Yeah, that's a good motto, I think, to stick to. Leave the gray areas over to the people who know what the risks and rewards involved are. Well, thank you very, very much for your time, Barry. I really, really appreciate you taking time out to do this for us. It's really, really helpful. It's great to talk to you, by the way. I don't think we've ever had this chat before. So I hope to be able to see you face to face at some stage, maybe at an event in New York in the future somewhere. So everybody, big thanks to Barry Schwartz. And let's have a quick look at where we are with the level of donations. We're getting close to the $3,000 mark, so that's really, really good. Please keep donating, people. We really, really appreciate it. It's very important. It goes to a very, very good cause. We're not going to hit the target today. I think that's obvious, but there will be future events organized by SE Ranking to keep the campaign active. There'll be other opportunities to donate. And like I said before, please share this with your friends, your family, your co-workers. This is a very important cause. I realize that the war in Ukraine and the news about the war has become a bit of background noise, and different countries have other priorities. Here in the UK, we have now a prime minister sitting in office who's admitted to breaking the law. There you go. In France, there's a very important presidential election coming up. There's all around the world, people are struggling with higher costs of living that are now taking over the news cycle. But we cannot stop caring about this. We cannot just see this as background noise that we just sort of forget about. We have to make sure that the people of Ukraine, and especially the children of Ukraine, are supported and throughout this conflict. And this is probably going to drag on for a while, and we should keep our attention and our focus on it, and keep donating, keep doing what we can, however modest it is, to help them and support them in any way. So thank you very much for that. And again, Barry, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Briefly about SE Ranking as a platform. If you haven't yet tried it, use the QR code on screen now. You can get an extended free trial of the platform. It's a all-in-one SEO platform. It has a rank tracker, website auditing tool, competitive analysis tool. Really valuable tool set for people working in SEO that can really help you improve your rankings, get the right information on how to improve your rankings and improve your website in general. So please make use of them. And also by supporting them as a company, you're also indirectly supporting the people in Ukraine, because they have a lot of Ukrainian employees and they support the people there in many different ways. There will be future webinars organized by SE Rankings, so keep an eye on that. The link is in the chat at the moment. As well for the extended subscription. Go to the seranking.com website. They have a webinar section where you can look at upcoming webinars as well as previous webinars. So they'll be doing more of these in the future. And I want to thank all our speakers again. Massive thanks for them for contributing the time to this webinar. Aleyda, Solis, Kristina Azarenko, and Barry Schwartz. I have been Barry Adams. Thank you all very much for joining, for asking questions, and especially thank you for donating. We really, really appreciate it. And that is it for us today. Thank you.